The clock in the interrogation room ticked like a metronome of guilt, and the hum of the fluorescent light made my skin crawl. I had already drained 3 cups of coffee and every question from the manual. He, sweaty, wrists marked by the cuffs, pretended a studied exhaustion. I kept my voice low, the light focused on his face, the red recorder blinking like an impatient heartbeat. Hours. Silence is worth more than words. When the pen tapped the table for the umpteenth time, he laughed, a dry sound, the kind that knows where it hurts, and said, without looking at me, "In the backyard of the Blue House, the fence always gave way on the 3rd board. That's where you ran the first time from a beating you didn't deserve." The air left my lungs as if someone had shut the room off. He lifted his eyes, closed the distance between us with a sentence that carried the weight of years. "Your father used to say, 'Every man has a door that never creaks.'" Then he tilted his head, measured my left shoulder, and whispered, "You still dip it when you aim, kid, just like he taught you." I stopped breathing. Only my father knew that, and my father is dead. I was born and raised in a small town in the interior of the United States, where the streets were too short to hide secrets and long enough to echo stories that never seemed to end. My father was a cop, the kind of man who wore the uniform as if it were an extension of his own skin. I grew up watching his boots on the doorstep, heavy with mud and silence, and sometimes his distant gaze, as if he had left a piece of himself at every scene he worked. He used to say the law was simple, but men were complicated. I never forgot that phrase. When he died far too soon, I was still a teenager trying to understand where the sun ended and the man I needed to become began. And deep down, even if I didn't admit it, I joined the force because I was chasing his shadow, trying to prove to myself that I could carry the same weight that had eventually crushed him. My life became a mix of rigid routine and sleepless nights. I don't have a family of my own, never managed to keep anything lasting beyond a few months, because the job consumes everything. People think being a cop is about solving crimes, making arrests, showing up in headlines. The truth is, being a cop is carrying society's failures on your back, all of them, and still waking up every morning, putting the badge on your chest, and believing that maybe, just maybe, you can make a difference. I learned to live with the smell of gunpowder as if it were the scent of home. I learned to trust my brothers in uniform more than any old friendship, and I learned to endure solitude, because it's there, in that silence, where the honesty of this job truly lives. I carry scars that don't show up on X-rays. One came the first time I had to fire my weapon. The trigger pulled something out of me that never came back. Another came when I couldn't save a 15-year-old boy, holding a gun bigger than his own body. And another, quieter still, the day I realized I was losing sight of who I was without the badge. My mother used to say I had the same look my father did when he went quiet, as if he were talking to ghosts. Maybe I am. Maybe I never stopped talking to him. My values are simple on the surface: justice, loyalty, courage. But beneath them lies broken ground full of doubts. What is justice when the law fails? Where does loyalty end when a fellow officer crosses the line? And courage, does it mean facing danger or facing the truth? I ask myself those questions almost every night, sitting alone in the kitchen with the faint glow of the fridge light, illuminating a half-empty beer. The badge on the table reflects back like a warped mirror. I stare at it and try to convince myself I'm still the same kid who believed the force was the straightest path to honoring my father's name. But every case, every victim's eyes, every muffled scream in a cell pulls me further away from that illusion. The city I work in isn't the one I grew up in, but they all look the same once violence takes root. Gangs, drugs, corruption. It doesn't matter the zip code. Evil always finds a way to grow, and I'm always there, trying to cut the leaves while the roots keep digging deeper. It's a losing battle, and yet I can't let go, because deep down, I'm driven by an obsession to discover where my father ended and where I begin. Every suspect I confront, every interrogation I lead, feels like an unfinished conversation with him, as if, at some point, in the chaos, I'll finally find the answer I never had. I'm no hero, never pretended to be. I'm a man who makes mistakes, who loses patience, who's thought about walking away more than once, but wakes up the next day with the same weight pressing down and realizes he doesn't know how to live without it. I'm the cop who still dips his left shoulder when aiming, because that's how my father taught me, and maybe that's what haunts me most. The thin line between inheritance and curse. I keep going because I don't know how to stop. And I keep going because, deep down, I'm afraid of finding out who I am without this badge. It was the beginning of autumn, the kind of night when the cold wind cuts deeper than it should, and the city seemed to breathe in silence, as if it knew something was about to happen. I was at the station, going through reports, trying to find logic in statistics that never tell. The whole story when the radio crackled with the urgency of a punch to the gut. A metallic voice, almost devoid of emotion, announced an anonymous tip. A suspicious man, tied to strange movements in abandoned warehouses in the industrial zone, had been seen pacing nervously near a decommissioned building. The detail that froze my blood was the add-on. According to the tip, he appeared to be carrying documents that could compromise not only criminal operations, but also names inside the force itself. When the radio mentioned that last part, the room seemed to shrink. Internal corruption has always been the shadow that haunts anyone wearing the badge, and every time it rises, it puts everything in check. Loyalty, honor, even survival itself. I grabbed my jacket, checked the weapon in its holster, and walked toward the squad car with my heart beating in a strange rhythm, a mix of adrenaline and foreboding. The driver looked at me with the expression of a man who knows the night is about to get long. We didn't exchange words, we just went. The city lights streaked past, reflecting on the windows like ghosts running alongside us. The radio kept spitting out fragmented updates, suspicious activity, possible connection to a larger network, risk of escape. Each piece felt like a spark lighting up an old memory. I'd heard calls like this before, but that night, something felt different. Heavy, as if deep down this wasn't just another case. It was something that had been following me for years, even if I hadn't realized it yet. When we got close to the location, the scene spoke for itself. The warehouse loomed like a skeleton against the darkness, broken windows catching the moonlight like blades of glass. The silence was so heavy that even the idling engine of the car seemed too loud. I called for backup over the radio, but I knew the minutes until their arrival would feel endless. I decided to go in first, at least to observe. Experience teaches you that sometimes surprise is the only edge you've got left. My driver stayed on watch, scanning the perimeter, while I advanced in measured steps, every snap of a twig echoing like a gunshot. That's when the unexpected happened. Before I even crossed the warehouse door, a shadow darted too quickly across the street corner like something trying to escape the light. I rushed forward, gun drawn, and intercepted him. The man looked more scared than dangerous, but his eyes carried secrets that didn't belong to an ordinary person. He didn't resist much, just muttered disjointed phrases, like someone fighting to keep something hidden and yet desperate to let it out. Getting the cuffs on him was easy. What was hard was facing the silence afterward, because somewhere deep inside, I felt this meeting hadn't happened by chance. Backup finally arrived, bringing the technical relief of routine, but it didn't ease the sense that the night had only just begun. We transported the suspect back to the station, and on the ride, he never took his eyes off me in the rearview mirror. He didn't say a word, but it was as though he was measuring my every breath, like he already knew me from somewhere. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I've seen plenty of criminals try to manipulate, to fake bonds, to play mind games with cops. But there was something in his expression that was different, almost personal, and I couldn't explain why. All I knew was that this call, which started as just another entry in the log, was about to become the case that would forever change how I saw my past, my father, and the very badge I carried. The squad car cut through the darkness like a silent blade. The light bar was off, but I could feel the red and blue ready to tear the fragile calm of the city at any second. As we drew closer to the industrial zone, the smell of rust and burnt oil began to seep through the cracks of the window, bringing back the unsettling memory of places no one chooses to visit. Abandoned depots, dead factories, skeletons of a past the city preferred to bury. When we parked a few yards from the warehouse mentioned in the call, I killed the engine and let silence settle. It was as if the air itself was being held, waiting for the first move to breathe again. My partner avoided my eyes, but I could see the tension in the way he clutched the portable radio, as if it were an anchor. I stepped out of the car, and the cold wind hit me head-on, carrying the faint sound of metal chains clanging somewhere unseen. The warehouse facade rose before me like a mutilated giant. Walls covered in faded graffiti, rusted gates that groaned even while standing still, and broken windows that looked like watchful eyes. It was the kind of place that breathed danger, even empty. The moonlight bounced off shards of glass scattered across the ground, turning each step into a sharp crack, as if I were announcing my own presence to whoever might be inside. My boots struck, firm, but my heart faltered in an irregular rhythm. I had walked into places like this before, but that night it felt different, almost personal. The silence wasn't the usual quiet of city backstreets. It was heavy, thick with expectation, as if the walls knew my name and were waiting to whisper it back. The radio on my belt hissed softly, reminding me I wasn't alone, yet everything around me screamed solitude. The warehouse didn't just stand there. It watched. It waited, like it had been, expecting me for a long time. The first impression was abandonment, but the details betrayed another truth. A cigarette butt with ash still fresh near the entrance, tire tracks etched into the damp dirt, a scrap of paper snagged in the fence, as if someone had passed through in a hurry. This wasn't a forgotten ruin. It was a stage used only hours ago. My body reacted instantly. My hand went to the gun, my eyes scanning every shadow, every glint. I could swear someone was there, watching, waiting for the right moment. My partner shot me a quick glance, silently asking for a decision. I motioned for him to cover the rear while I advanced. The rusted gate was only pulled shut, not locked. A shove was enough to push it open, its screech echoing through the darkness like a warning. The smell inside was different, old dust mixed with the sharp tang of recent sweat, a contrast that left no doubt the place was occupied. The beam of my flashlight swept the ground, illuminating stacked crates, some cracked, some untouched, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The high ceiling, its corroded beams dripping occasional water, turned each drop into a gunshot against the concrete. With every step, the sensation grew stronger. This wasn't just a scene of a crime, it was part of something much bigger. The tip hadn't been random. Someone wanted me there. The chill crawling down my spine didn't come from the night air, but from intuition. My father used to say some places carry memories, and when a cop steps into them, he has to be ready to hear what was never said. In that moment, I had the strange impression the warehouse was speaking to me, drawing me into a game I didn't yet understand. And as I pushed forward, a certainty began to take shape. Whatever was about to happen inside wasn't just about a suspect or documents or corruption. It was about me, about my past, about a shadow I never wanted to face but now stood before me, unavoidable. The first step inside, the warehouse felt like crossing an invisible border. Darkness swallowed what little light came from the street, and for a moment, the only sound was my boots striking the cold concrete. My flashlight cut through the black in narrow beams, revealing rows of stacked crates and tight corridors arranged like a maze. The air was heavy, thick with mold and something metallic, a scent that reminded me of dried blood. With every movement, the sensation of being watched grew sharper, and it wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. I had learned long ago that when your body reacts before your mind, it's because the threat is already there, waiting. I signaled for my partner to move up for cover, but he hesitated, if only for a fraction of a second. This was the kind of environment where any shadow could become an ambush. A metallic crash rang out from the back, like a chain falling to the ground. My hand went straight to my weapon. I aimed the beam of light toward the sound and advanced. The bay. Crates cast distorted silhouettes on the walls. Giant, faceless figures moving with every step. The silence that followed was worse than the noise itself, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Seconds later, sound ripped through again. Hurried footsteps somewhere to the left. I broke into a run toward a side corridor, adrenaline flooding every nerve. The pounding of my boots against the ground felt like a countdown, each beat speeding up my heart. Turning the corner, I caught sight of the figure. He was moving fast, trying to slip through a side exit. I shouted, voice sharp enough to break the silence. "Police! Stop now!" He didn't stop. I caught him in the beam of my flashlight, and for the first time, I saw his face, sweat pouring, eyes wide. But there was something else, something that made my hand tremble, the way he looked at me, as if he already knew me. Then the chaos erupted. He stumbled deliberately into a stack of crates, sending them crashing down in a thunder that echoed through the entire building. The sound was a signal, and I realized I wasn't alone. Footsteps scattered across the far end, wood splintered. My partner shouted something I couldn't make out. The warehouse came alive, like it had been waiting to spring the trap. I wasn't chasing one man. I had walked into a nest. I dove behind a pile of pallets as the first sharp crack split the air. It wasn't wood breaking. It was gunfire. The shots echoed against the metal walls, each one a thunderclap. Concrete splintered near my head, spraying dust. I returned fire, 2 quick bursts toward the source, more to buy time than to hit anyone. My partner engaged from behind, his shots ringing out, the building shaking under the metallic chorus. Adrenaline burned in my veins. Every second stretched, dragging out as if time itself wanted to prolong the tension. Sweat ran down my neck despite the biting cold. The darkness was no longer just oppressive, it was hostile. Every shadow was a possible gunman. Every echo of footsteps a flank closing in. I zigzagged between the stacks, looking for cover, for advantage, but above all, trying to understand. The call had been about a single suspect, so why was I in the middle of a carefully planned ambush? Then I saw him again. Amid the chaos and gunfire, the first man I'd spotted wasn't running anymore. He leaned against the wall, calm, eyes locked on me. He wasn't shooting. He wasn't shouting. He was waiting. And in that look, I understood. This wasn't about the operation or about documents or even corruption. It was about me. They had known I'd come. They had known how I'd move. Every reaction of mine was being measured. The gunfire lulled for a moment, a hollow silence cutting through the haze. And in that pause, I heard it. A voice, rough and deliberate, slicing through the distance like a knife. You dipped your shoulder, just like the old man. It was as if the world froze. My partner kept firing, bullets tore into walls. But all I heard was that whisper, a phrase no criminal could ever have known. And in that moment, the fight stopped being about survival. It became something else, something far more personal. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had begun, like someone had shut off the valve of violence. The silence that followed was louder than the shots themselves. The acrid smell of gunpowder burned my throat, mixing with the dust shaken loose from shattered concrete. My breathing was short, each inhale a fight to stay clear-headed amidst the chaos. My eyes scanned the dark, searching for movement, and that's when I saw him. The man who had been watching me hadn't moved an inch. He stood there, rooted, staring straight at me, as if the storm of bullets had been nothing but background noise. I moved forward slowly, weapon raised, my legs heavy as if weighed down by lead. My partner shouted for me to wait, but something stronger was pulling me ahead, something inevitable. My flashlight finally washed over his face. He was young, younger than I expected, but his eyes, those eyes carried years of history, a burden that didn't belong to someone his age. Then he gave a faint, knowing smile, and my stomach turned. "You still don't see it, do you?" he said, his voice low, almost intimate, like he was talking brother to brother. My grip on the gun tightened, but inside, the ground beneath me was already crumbling. He took a steady breath and added, The old man always said you wouldn't know when to stop. That one day, your obsession would bring you straight to me. My heart skipped. He had mentioned my father, not like a criminal mocking a fallen cop, but like someone who had been there, someone who knew things he couldn't possibly know. My mind tried to reject it, rationalize it away, but my body betrayed me. A shiver climbed my spine because deep down I already knew this wasn't coincidence. I lifted the beam higher, and that's when I saw it. Hanging from his neck was a rusted medallion, identical to the one my father used to wear in his final years. A keepsake he claimed was a shield. I recognized it instantly, every scratch, every dent. But that medallion had been buried with him. I was there. I saw it lowered into the ground. "How do you have that?" I demanded, my voice breaking for the first time in years. He tilted his head, calm, almost cruel. "Because the old man wasn't just yours, he was mine too." The words hit like grenades. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced through decades in seconds. My father's unexplained absences, the nights he came home distant and hollow-eyed, the sense that a part of him was always somewhere else. It all clicked, but in a way I wished it never had. The suspect, no, the man, kept peeling me open with his stare. He taught me the same things he taught you. How to dip your shoulder, how to use silence, how never to lose focus. But while you inherited the badge, I inherited the silence. You were the official son. I was the secret. I felt my partner's eyes on me, puzzled, wondering why I wasn't pulling the trigger. But I couldn't, because the man in front of me wasn't just a suspect anymore. He was blood. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "My father." He gave a sad smile and murmured, "He never told you because he knew you couldn't handle it. And now the truth has come, because it was always meant to. You had to find me." The world collapsed inward. The man I had chased, the target I was meant to book and process, was my half-brother, the hidden son of a past my father had never confessed. And the proof of it all swung from his neck, gleaming under my flashlight, a corroded piece of metal turned ghost. In that instant, I realized this wasn't just another case. It was a cursed inheritance, a secret unearthed, detonating in my hands. My body stood frozen in front of him, but inside I was a battlefield. My hand held the gun steady, trained never to waver, but my heart pounded, like a war drum out of sync. I stared at this man, my supposed half-brother, and everything inside me screamed in opposite directions. Part of me saw only a suspect, someone tied to crime, someone who should be cuffed, processed, and buried in the cold lines of a report. But another part, deeper, more primal, saw something I had never prepared for, a distorted reflection of my own history, a scar born of the same blood running through my veins. My father. My father had been the compass of my life. Even after death, every choice, every step I took was guided by his memory. The badge I wore was my way of keeping his legacy alive. And now, standing face to face with a man who carried not only crimes, but also abandonment in his eyes, I felt the very foundation of my identity crack. Had I spent my entire life honoring a hero who never existed? Was I serving an ideal, or just chasing the shadow of a man I never truly knew? Memories slashed through me like knives. My father at the table, carefully teaching me how to breathe before pulling the trigger. The bitter smell of his morning coffee. The nights he came home late, muttering something about extra hours, but with eyes that betrayed another story. I had never questioned him. I wanted to believe. But now those same moments reeked of lies, and the truth was unbearable. My mind barked orders. Do your job. Cuff him. End this. But my heart rebelled. What if cuffing him means locking away part of yourself? I had always believed the law drew the line between right and wrong, that as long as I stayed inside that line, I was clean. But here, the line had vanished. I was naked before the cruelest contradiction, being a cop and a son at the same time. My partner's eyes burned into me from the shadows. He didn't understand why I wasn't moving, why my silence stretched longer than it should. I could feel his doubt, his suspicion. If I hesitated too long, I'd look weak. If I pulled the trigger, I'd look merciless. But worse, then his judgment, or the department's, was my own conscience tearing me apart. Could I still claim to be fair, to be just? Or had I always been chained to a poisoned legacy from the start? The man, my half-brother, seemed to sense every fracture within me. His stare wasn't defiant, it was knowing. He realized the effect he was having on me, and maybe that was his real weapon. Not a pistol, not the men who'd fired from the shadows, but the truth. The truth as ammunition, and I was being riddled with holes, without a single bullet fired. Training had taught me to stay focused, never to let emotions cloud judgment. But how do you stay focused when your entire life is collapsing in front of you? I had always thought my worst enemy would be out there, hiding in some alley with a finger on the trigger. I never imagined he would be inside me, cloaked in doubt, carrying my own last name. My throat was dry, my weapon heavier with every heartbeat. I didn't know if I was pointing it at a criminal or at a broken piece of family I'd never asked for. And in that moment, I realized something brutal. There was no way out unscathed. Any choice I made would leave scars. The only question was, what kind of scars was I willing to live with? Time seemed frozen inside that warehouse, but my body knew every second of hesitation carried a price. The radio crackled in the distance. My partner barked clipped orders that dissolved into the metallic echo, yet none of it reached me. The only thing that mattered was in front of me, a man bound by fate, carrying my blood, dismantling everything I believed was true. I had always imagined a moment of decision would come with explosions, with bullets tearing the air, with life and death balanced on the trigger. But no, it was here, in silence, in the weight of his stare that cut through me. He didn't run, he didn't beg, he simply waited, as if certain I was incapable of doing what had to be done. My hand gripped the gun, steady, trained. The protocol was clear: arrest him. The law demanded I ignore the personal connection and do my duty, yet his words still echoed. He was mine too. Each syllable struck like a hammer. Each memory of my father splintered into shards of glass, stabbing my reason. I could feel the badge pressing against my chest, heavier than ever. For the first time, it didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a chain. I tried to breathe, to summon logic from the chaos. The law had always been my refuge, the clean line between order and ruin. But what happens when the rot comes from your own bloodline? What happens when even the man you worshipped turns out to be a stranger? This wasn't a choice about arrest or release. This was about deciding who I wanted to be from this moment on. I could have pulled the trigger, ended it right there. Quick, final, maybe even easier. Killing him would erase the questions, silence the ghosts, bury the secrets before they had the chance to grow. But that would make me, what? An executioner, not a cop, a man who sought revenge instead of justice. And I knew if I crossed that line, the mirror would never forgive me. The other path was to cuff him, follow the book, hand him over. But that option was poisoned too. He knew too much. About me, about my father, about cracks in the very system I'd sworn to defend. If he fell into the wrong hands, his words could burn everything down. The department, the force, maybe even me. Standing on the edge of that abyss, I did. The only thing that made sense. I lowered the gun slowly, the metal hot with tension. I holstered it and locked eyes with him. "You're coming with me," I said, my voice grave, almost a whisper but carrying the weight of command. "Not as just another suspect, not as my enemy. You're coming because I need the truth, all of it." Behind me, my partner erupted in protest, but I cut him off with a single raised hand. This was my decision, and I would own the consequences. I didn't know if I was saving a criminal or simply postponing the inevitable, but I knew this. Letting him go, or killing him, would mean running from the truth I could no longer avoid. That was the real decision. Not between law and blood, but between living in a comfortable lie or walking into the fire of reality. And I chose the fire. For the first time, his expression shifted. The defiance melted into something else. Respect. Maybe even relief. He knew I had crossed the line, that I was willing to step into the unknown. No matter the cost. And in his eyes, I read a message clearer than words. The true battle hadn't ended in that warehouse. It had only just begun. The silence after my decision was heavier than any gunshot. I holstered my weapon, but the weight of it still clung to my hands, as if it had fused with my skin. My partner rushed over, eyes wide, chest heaving, unable to believe what he'd just witnessed. He wanted answers, orders, anything that made sense. But all I had was a storm inside me. I raised a hand and said only, "He's coming with me." That was enough to shift the tension into something worse: distrust. I could feel it. It wasn't just about breaking protocol. It was about the doubt I had planted in someone who had always trusted me blindly. The radio barked with urgent requests for updates. Command wanted details. Situation secured, number of suspects, evidence collected. I lied. For the first time in my career, I withheld the truth. I reported that we had one man in custody, that the EA scene was contained, that we were bringing him in for questioning. My fingers trembled as I released the transmit button. The lie tasted like rust in my mouth, bitter and metallic. But it was either that or expose the wound before I had even begun to understand it myself. The man, my half-brother, though I couldn't yet say the words, walked between us with the calm of someone who had been waiting for this night. He didn't resist the cuffs. He didn't run. He only watched me, every step a reminder. Of a father I suddenly realized I didn't know at all. His silence was worse than taunts. It was a constant reminder that he held the truth I craved. He wasn't my prisoner. He was my mirror. When we stepped outside, backup units had already lit up the street with red and blue. The lights reflected in the broken glass like scattered flames. Officers swarmed forward, weapons drawn, ready to take over what they assumed was a standard arrest. I shut it down instantly. He's in custody, with me only. My tone left no room for questions, but the stares burned into me anyway. They knew this wasn't normal. They smelled the fracture in my armor. The ride back was suffocating. My partner gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles went pale, jaw clenched, refusing to speak. The radio buzzed with chatter, but he left it for me to answer. I had led the operation. I would also carry the silence. In the rearview mirror, I could feel his eyes on me. Those same eyes that carried secrets. Those same eyes that dismantled me without a word. And in every reflection, I saw my father. Not the hero I had built in memory, but a stranger who had lived 2 lives and left me with the fallout. The station was a minefield when we arrived. Colleagues gathered, curious, hungry for details. Some wanted to see the suspect. Others asked what had gone down inside the warehouse. I held them all at arm's length, a wall of authority hiding a storm of doubt. I escorted him straight into the interrogation room, the same place where I had broken so many men before. But this time, it wasn't about extracting a confession. It was about uncovering who I really was. The immediate consequences were everywhere. My partner's trust shaken, command growing suspicious, the silent judgment of every cop who passed by, and the presence of a man who unraveled my life with just a look. The badge weighed heavier than ever, not as a symbol of duty, but as a chain binding me to a truth I couldn't yet face. And yet deep down, I knew there was no turning back. The decision had been made, the lie already spoken, the secret now mine to carry. From that point forward, every minute would be a fight to hold control before the whole thing collapsed. Because one thing was undeniable. This was no longer just about a case. It was personal, too personal. And the first crack had already split open. The interrogation room felt smaller that night. The gray walls, so familiar, pressed in as if they were accomplices to the secret that filled the air. The fluorescent lamp buzzed above us, flickering just enough to remind me how fragile everything was. I sat across from him, the cuffs glinting cold on the metal table. He didn't look like a suspect. He wasn't restless, didn't avoid my eyes, didn't ask questions. He just stared, calm and steady, as if he knew exactly where the power really sat, and it wasn't with me. I crossed my arms, trying to keep my voice firm. You've got 2 options. Talk now and maybe cut yourself a deal, or stay silent and let the weight of the law crush you. It was a line I'd delivered 100 times before, a rehearsed piece of theater that almost always worked, but he just smirked, like a man listening to an old, worn-out joke. Then he leaned forward, lowered his voice and said, "You talk like he used to." My gut twisted. The professional mask I wore began to crack. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. He let the silence stretch, feeding the tension before answering. "Our Father." The word detonated in the room like a shot. The air thickened and every breath felt like dragging concrete through my lungs. "You're lying," I tried to snap back, but even to my own ears the conviction was gone. He saw it. He leaned in further. "I'm not lying. Want proof? Ask me about the fence in the backyard of the blue house. Ask me about the dog he had before you were born. Ask me about the scar on his right leg, the one he claimed was from service but was really from a bar fight. Ask me, and I'll tell you things only a son would know." My heartbeat hammered in my chest. His words sliced through me, each one prying open memories I thought were mine alone. I wanted to stand, to leave, to escape the weight of his stare, but I couldn't. I was locked in place, bound not by protocol but by blood. Then he leaned even closer and dropped the phrase that shattered everything. "He didn't die the way you think." The world stopped. My voice was barely a whisper. "What did you say?" His gaze didn't falter. "Our Father." That funeral wasn't the end. He knew too much. And when he realized the system wouldn't protect him, he did the only thing he could. He disappeared. I was his secret, his second chance, his escape plan. You were the official son, the mirror of his career. I was the hidden son, the blind spot, and only together can we find him. The light flickered again, and for a split second of darkness, I felt the ground vanish beneath me. My father alive? Impossible. I had seen his body. I had buried him. But the conviction in this man's eyes, the certainty in his tone, pulled me into a spiral where nothing was impossible anymore. If it was true, then everything, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every reason I had put on the badge, was built on a colossal lie. "Why now?" I asked, desperate for something solid. He didn't hesitate. "Because you're ready." He always said you had to reach the edge, face the darkness, before you could bear the truth. That moment is here. This isn't about me, or even about you. It's about him, about us. The room shrank until I could barely breathe. The badge on my chest seared like hot iron, not a symbol of duty anymore, but of betrayal. My father's ghost wasn't gone. It had been hiding, waiting. That night I realized the interrogation wasn't about breaking a suspect. It was a summons, a call into a truth bigger than my family, bigger than the badge, a conspiracy stretching far beyond what I had ever imagined. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer, because the answer might destroy the last solid piece of ground I had left. I stayed in that room long after he was taken back to his cell, sitting at the cold metal table as if I were still locked in his gaze. The silence wasn't the same silence of the station anymore. Now it had a voice, and that voice came from inside my head. "He didn't die the way you think." The phrase looped endlessly, breaking apart every certainty I had ever built. I had always believed my father was taken too soon, a hero who fell serving the law. That belief was the foundation of my career, of my very identity. And if that foundation was a lie, then who was I? Memories I had buried began clawing their way back. Conversations that went quiet the moment I walked into the room. Service trips with no official record. That scar on his leg he always claimed was from duty, but now sounded like a story patched together. And above all, the constant weight in his eyes, as if he were carrying something far heavier than his badge. I had mistaken that silence for strength. Now I saw it for what it really was: fear. And that fear seemed to have seeped into me. I'd always believed my choices were mine, that I wore the badge because it was my calling, my destiny. But what if it wasn't choice at all? What if I'd been chasing a path laid out for me by a man full of secrets? The thought ate away at me. The badge on my chest, once a source of pride, now felt like a shackle. Was I truly fighting for justice or just clinging to a family illusion? And yet, buried in the pain, something new began to stir. What he, my half-brother, had told me wasn't just destruction. It was also possibility. If my father had faked his death, If he had vanished into the cracks, then his life held more truth than I ever imagined. Maybe I had been living inside an edited version of reality, and for the first time, I realized I needed the full picture, whatever it cost. That need began reshaping me. Doubt, once paralyzing, turned into fuel. I understood that pushing forward could ruin me, destroy my career, set me against my own brothers in uniform, unravel the system I had sworn to defend. But something larger was at stake now. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my father. It was about truth itself, the kind of truth that strips away illusions and forces you to see the world as it really is. And I knew then I would face it. If there was rot in the institution that sheltered my father, I would expose it. If there was a network built to bury secrets, I would dig until I tore it open. And if I discovered that my father had betrayed everything I thought he was, then I would accept the pain and rebuild myself from the ashes. That night, something inside me shifted. Blind loyalty to the badge was no longer enough. I carried a new mission, one that reached beyond protocols or orders. I needed the truth, raw, merciless, whole. And that meant hunting down ghosts, enemies in the shadows, and maybe even myself. When I finally walked out of that interrogation room, I wasn't the same man who had stepped in. The cop who once believed the law was his shield was gone. In his place stood someone willing to cross any line, pay any price, to uncover who my father truly was, and who I truly am. Dawn crept in slowly as I finished typing the official report. The words felt heavy, each sentence chosen with surgical precision, building a version of the story that looked clean on paper but hid the chaos beneath. On the page, it read like a routine operation: an anonymous tip, a suspect located in an abandoned warehouse, shots exchanged, and finally, a capture without serious injuries. Everything neat, procedural, unquestionable. A report any commander would skim, sign, and file away. But between those sterile lines, the real story throbbed like an open wound. I hadn't just brought in a criminal. I had dragged in a piece of my own bloodline, a living key to the darkest secret of my life. The station at that hour was nearly deserted. The hum of printers and the crackle of radios gave the place a ghostly air. Colleagues glanced over with suspicion, whispers trailing behind me as they tried to understand why I had taken complete control of the interrogation and shut everyone else out. My partner, the one who'd been in the warehouse with me, stayed quiet, but his silence was louder than accusations. He knew something was off. He didn't need evidence. He felt it. And his silence was more dangerous than any shouted confrontation. Escorting the man, my half-brother, to his holding cell was like walking through fire without flinching. He moved calmly, almost proudly, as if being locked up was part of some larger plan. He wasn't worried about prison. He knew I would come back to him. His confidence gnawed at me because he was right. He wasn't a prisoner. He was leverage. He was a truth I couldn't leave buried. When I stepped outside, into the night air, I sank into the driver's seat of the squad car and just sat there with the engine off. The cold seeped in, grounding me as my thoughts spiraled. The city slept around me, but I was too awake, too restless. The conclusion of the case wasn't in the signed papers or the logged evidence. It was in the abyss that had opened beneath my feet. On record, I had done everything right. Suspect apprehended, public safe, mission complete. But inside, I knew I had only pulled back the first layer of something much bigger, something that would consume me if I let it. The operation had begun as just another call, a simple response to an anonymous tip, but it ended as the most devastating revelation of my life, that my father's ghost wasn't buried 6 feet under. It was alive, and it was demanding answers. Back inside, I closed my locker, holstered my weapon, folded my jacket, and stared at the badge resting in my hand. The faint overhead light made it glint differently, as though it were forged from another metal entirely. It no longer looked like the symbol I'd inherited to honor my father. Now it was a question mark, a reminder that the uniform I wore carried shadows I hadn't wanted to see. The official conclusion was sealed. The paperwork would say it was just another resolved case. But I knew the truth. Nothing was resolved. Something far greater had begun. I hadn't simply arrested a suspect. I had touched a live wire, and its current was running straight through my life, burning everything I thought I knew. As I walked out into the dawn, the cold air biting my face, I understood the weight of what had been set in motion. The case might have been closed in the system, but the real investigation, the one that could destroy everything I was, had only just begun. The sun was already breaking across the horizon when I finally left the station. The golden light spilled over a city still half asleep, but for me, there was no rest. I walked like a man, divided, every step sinking into ground that felt ready to collapse beneath me. I carried the weight of the night, not just as a police case, but as an open wound carved into the story of my life. On paper, the operation was over. In truth, it was only beginning. All my life I believed that justice and truth walked side by side, that if I followed the law, I would find peace. But what that man, my half-brother, my father's hidden son, revealed, shattered that illusion. I learned that truth is not always clear, not always just, and more often than not, it hurts more than any lie. I also learned that the law has limits. It can punish crimes, but it can't heal wounds born of blood and silence. The badge on my chest, once a shield, now burned against me like a brand, reminding me that I was carrying a legacy I barely understood. That night taught me that my greatest enemy wasn't the criminals in the alleys or the gangs in the dark corners of the city. My greatest enemy lived inside my own house, in the stories that were never told, in the secrets my father buried with him, or pretended to. And realizing that forced me to face the truth. I hadn't put on the badge only out of duty. I had put it on to chase him, to become him. But now I know. I can't live forever in the shadow of a man who may never have been who I thought he was. The lesson is cruel, but it's the only one worth carrying. The truth cuts deep, but it also sets you free. If my father is alive, I will find him. If he left behind lies, I will uncover them. If my half-brother is a key to the puzzle or just another broken piece, I will learn the difference. Because even if the truth destroys me, it's the only road left. I'd rather face the pain of reality than live shackled to a comfortable lie. I looked up at the morning sky as the city began to stir. People walked to work. Children ran to school. Cafes opened their doors. To them, I was just another cop coming off shift, another face hidden, behind routine. None of them could imagine that beneath the uniform, I was falling apart and rebuilding myself at the same time. And maybe that's what being human really is. Breaking, bleeding, and still moving forward. I don't know where this road will lead me. Maybe to ruin, maybe to a truth too heavy to bear. But I've learned there is no escape. Life will always force you to face your ghosts. And when that happens, there is no weapon, no badge, no protocol to shield you. Only the courage to face the mirror and accept who you really are. Driving home that morning, exhaustion and restlessness clashing inside me, I thought of my father. If he is alive, one day I will find him. But I won't meet him as the boy who needed his approval. I'll meet him as the man who finally understands that truth is not inherited, it is earned. That is the mark the night left on me. The certainty that behind every case, behind every crime, there is always something deeper. The human layer, woven from secrets, guilt, and choices that define us. And perhaps that's the real mission of wearing the badge, not only to fight crime, but to carry, with all our flaws and scars, the humanity of searching for meaning in the chaos. If you've listened this far, I want you to remember one thing. The truth may break you, but it's also the only bridge to freedom. And in the end, that's what keeps us alive. Now I ask you, if this story struck something inside you, if any part of it stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because there are more stories to tell. Stories that never make the news, but reveal what it truly means to wear the badge.